This is a video update to my first video of the Leica M Type 262. That first video was based on a weeks-long rental of one of the bodies from lensrentals.com. But now that I've had about a month of time with my personal M262, I wanted to update this video with some things that I've learned since that time. The M Type 262 is based off of the M240 series, sharing basically all the electronics in that camera. However, stylistically, the camera is much more akin to the Leica M9 in terms of size and weight in the steps top plate. Leica went to an anodized aluminum top plate for this camera, which helps shave about 100 grams of weight. If you're coming from a Leica M9 series camera, you're going to notice virtually no difference in size or weight compared to a 240. You'll notice this camera does not have the preview frame lever, much like the Leica ME, which was the first digital Leica that I owned. There's no USB port over here. The live view button on the M240s is now a white balance button on the M Type 262. And because there is no video or live view mode, we don't have the port up here, nor do we have the holes here for sound or on the top of the camera. 262 is weather sealed like the 240 series, and Leica actually said it's more weather resistant if you're using the M240 and you don't have the port plugged up here, because this doesn't have these holes in it, that they said this body is actually a little more weather resistant than the 240 series. So that's good to know that Leica didn't make this a cost-cutting measure to get this body down to about the $5,000 price point. So no compromises were made. If you're interested in the M Type 262, more than likely you're either coming from the M9 series or you're new to the Leica system. For those that are already shooting the M240, there's really very little reason to come to the 262. The only two reasons would be a little bit lighter weight and the quieter sounding shutter. So let's fire off a few frames to hear the sound of the shutter. It's really one of my favorite features of this camera. I'm coming from the Leica ME, which is based on the M9. That shutter to me always sounded whiny on recocking mode, so I really love the sound of this shutter. Coming from the Leica M9, which offered a discrete and silent mode, this camera doesn't offer any of those modes. Nor do I think you're really going to need these modes on this camera. If you're using this camera out on the street, it's very quiet. It's not quiet like in any ways like an X100 series camera or a Ricoh GR would be, but this camera sound is very refined, and the noise of the street, most people aren't going to notice it, so it's a great sound. Like in the 240 series, the M262, you'll notice, no longer has the frame line illumination window. That's because this camera is illuminated with LED lights. However, unlike the 240 series, the M262 only offers white frame lines. The M240 series gives you the option of having red frame lines. One of my other favorite features of this camera coming from the Leica M9 series are the frame lines, which are optimized for 2 meters. The frame lines on the M9 series were optimized for 1 meter. How that plays out in real life is I tend to shoot things that are more middle distances to closer in. It makes for much more accurate frame lines compared to the M9 series. Shooting a 50 or 35 millimeter with some, say, 10, 15 feet, you're going to find it to be incredibly accurate. I always got frustrated with the 50 millimeter on my Leica M6 and even the M9 series. It just showed up so much more in the image than what was being shown in the frame line. So I'm glad that Leica went to the 2 meter optimized frame lines in this body. There are a couple of film modes on the 240 series that are missing, that aren't included in the Leica M262. The dust detection feature from the 240 series is also included in this camera. I did find out, this is probably a pretty niche group of people, but the multi-function hand grip, that's the 14495, it does not work on the M262. The interface at the bottom of the camera that's under this plate That's for diagnostics only. Leica is touting the 262 as being a kind of a Zen camera, and I have to agree with that. Coming from Fuji's and all the other digital cameras I've used with the labyrinth of pages and settings, the 262 is pretty refreshingly simple. It only has 3 pages of menu items. Let's take a quick look. At the top, we've got the first page of menu. We've got your lens detection, self-timer, the JPEG settings, and under the JPEG settings, just sharpness, saturation, and contrast. Under saturation, you can set it to black and white mode down here. A histogram. Let's see, we're going to the second page of that. Down here's where we're going to find our format the SD card. The third page of menu setting items are going to be under the set button. That's where we can tweak the ISO, set our white balance. White balance is really nicely done in this camera. If you're shooting, you can hit white balance. If you want to do a custom white balance, hit your up twice, or after hitting white balance, a couple of clicks to the left of this wheel up here. That'll get you to gray card setting mode. Hit set, it will prompt you to take a photograph. You can move this arrow around to choose the gray card setting area where you want it to monitor. Hit info, hit set, and you're ready to go. On subsequent uses, all you have to do, the quickest way, is first hold down this right pad button, then hit white balance, and it's going to jump you right back to taking a photograph. So you can actually skip a step, and makes it really fast and easy to set white balance on this camera. And being kind of a raw shooter, I never really worried much about gray card, but I might find myself doing it more just to make post-processing kind of even easier. Back in the set menu button area, we've got also user profiles are down here. That can be handy if you want to set some different profiles for maybe different ISO settings and things like that. So really simple, easy to use digital camera. The rear screen on the 262 is vastly improved from the M9 series, which was about 230,000 dot pitch. This is now 921,600 DPI. It has a Gorilla Glass back screen, although right now I've got a Soapy Guard protector on here, which is really actually made by Pavo Screen. Pretty inexpensive, fits really well. Just better be safe than sorry, so I slapped that on there. It's really unobtrusive. As I mentioned earlier, this camera virtually weighs the same as the M9. I had a Thumbie device on my camera, on the ME, and when I weighed this body and that body with the Thumbie, there was maybe a 6 grams difference. So you're going to feel really no difference coming from an M9, and it's pretty noticeable, I think, when you pick up a 240, how much heavier it feels. So it's nice that Leica slimmed this down. In terms of the finish, I'm going to call this kind of a flat black matte. I've noticed that it doesn't really seem to collect or hold fingerprints. They clean off really easily. This leatherette material has a little bit soft and grippy feeling. I know one person really liked the shark skin feeling that came on the MP series film cameras, but I think this is really nicely done. It kind of harkens back to the classic M2 days, but feels great. It's just a really well-feeling constructed camera. And it's probably worth pointing out that this is not a black paint camera. It's an anodized aluminum top. So if it does wear, which I'm kind of glad it's not black paint, to be honest. I have a M6 I bought new in the early 90s, and it still looks great. So I think this camera is going to wear really well over time, but it'll be interesting to see. It'll probably kind of wear, for those that really are going to use the heck out of these, probably to maybe even a silver under there. It's hard to say, but it's going to be a really, I think, a hard-wearing camera. Kind of little notes here. You can set in between shutter speeds for half stops. And once you get to the A setting here, it's a little harder to get off so you don't accidentally bump the camera. Another big ergonomic plus to me is on the M9 series, there was a wheel down here to control exposure values and different settings. I tend to use Auto ISO, which I think is a great method. Let the camera choose the ISO. I really don't care. what the ISO is for the most part, because this camera is really great up to 3200. So I know often what shutter speed and aperture I need to pull off whatever picture I'm trying to take. So I can set whatever shutter speed and aperture I want, let the camera pick the ISO, I have total control. But if I need to tweak it a little bit, I can assign the EV values to this back wheel. All I have to do is plus or minus. I tend to do the expose to the right method to tweak my histogram as far right as possible without blowing out the highlights. I'm finding on this camera, when I have it to my eye, it's just so much easier to go over here and tweak it. With the M9 series, it was a little more awkward to try and get down to this wheel and change it easily. So I think that's a big ergonomic plus coming from the M9 series. With the camera base plate off, we can see here's our battery coming from the 240 series, a nice big beefy battery. And I never really ran out of battery, even with my M9 series. I'm a pretty frugal shooter coming from my film days, but I think you're going to be hard pressed to need a second battery unless you're going to be on some kind of a trip where you don't think you can charge the camera every single day. But you can still probably go a couple days on this. So it's great to see it. Again, here's that port I mentioned earlier. That's only for diagnostics on this camera. The SD card is back here. They did beef up from the 240 series. We've got the nice bigger lug on the side. And the tripod is built in socket into the camera. On the M9 series, it was built into the base plate, so that should make this camera a little more beefy as well. The metering mode on this camera is classic Leica heavily center weighted metering. It does not have spot or multi-metering like those found in the M240 series. This isn't really a cost-cutting measure. Those modes came because of live view and video made those possible. So just classic center weighted metering on the 262. Another nice addition to this camera coming from the M9 series, and I assume this is also in the 240 series, is whenever you turn on the camera, if you have an EV value set to something other than 0, it's going to initially show you the ISO the camera is set to. So that's nice. If you've got it set to 200, you go indoors and you need to go up to 16 or 3200, it's going to alert you what it is. But it'll also show you any EV values that are set off of 0. So I think that's a great reminder on this camera. Much appreciated coming from the M9 series. Startup times on this camera are very fast. It's comparable to the M240 series. Lots of people seem to complain about the 240 being slow to start up, but the key seems to be formatting your SD cards as exFAT on your computer, and then formatting in the camera retains that formatting. So the fastest startup time I was able to achieve from turning the camera on to being able to make an image was 1.6 seconds, and that was with a Panasonic Gold 8GB card. Testing other cards, I have 16GB SanDisk Extreme Pro. That's a 95 megabyte a second card. That was 1.8 seconds. The 16GB Panasonic Gold 1.9, and a 16GB Samsung Pro, one of the white cards, it was 1.75 seconds. In order to measure the times, as I turned on the camera while I was holding down the shutter button, I recorded this on video. Then I used Audacity to be able to, quote, see the sound of the shutter being, collar being turned, and then the sound of the shutter. So this allowed for a really precise measurement. An example of how crucial it could be to format an exFAT, I have a 16GB Panasonic Gold card. Now, when it was formatted as MS-DOS FAT, it was 5 seconds from turning the camera on to being able to fire. But once I formatted the card first in my computer as exFAT and then formatted the card in the camera again, that reduced the startup to fire time to 1.9 seconds on this camera. So again, exFAT's the key. The M262 has a 1GB RAM buffer, and that's the same as the 240 series. The MP240, they jumped up to a 2GB RAM buffer. On this camera, when using a SanDisk 16GB card, it's a 95 megabyte a second, that allowed me to capture about 65 photos in a minute. Now, the Samsung and some of my slower Panasonic cards can only capture about 45 images a minute. Now, this is still much better than the M9. And I don't think the addition of a 2GB buffer like in the 240 MP series would make any difference to the way that I shoot. Like, there's only one instance I can remember when shooting with the ME where the smaller buffer and slow write time caused me inability to make an image. So I'm more of a marksman, I'm not a machine gunner. My takeaway from using this camera is probably the fastest, smallest card may give the ultimate in performance. So maybe the 16 gigabyte SanDisk Extreme, or potentially Samsung's making some pretty low price, great memory cards that are probably worth looking at too. In terms of raw image quality, 1600 on this camera, it's cleaner than 1600 on the M9, but not by breathtaking margins. And I always thought the M9 got a little bit of a bad rap. I thought I could shoot at 1600, but if you're really pixel peeping, you're going to see the grain on the ME series. But where this camera really trumps the M9 series is the ability to shoot without restriction at 3200. I do see some banding in certain cases at 6400, so I probably would only use 6400 in kind of rare circumstances on this camera. But once you're south of 1600 ISO in terms of image quality, the M9's as good as the M262, and they're both pretty stunning. If you follow the link in my video to the full blog post review, there's a link in there you can download raw images made with the 262 and the M9, so you can compare them side by side. They were shot at the same time, with the same focal length, same settings. I did find that this camera's white balance was much more accurate than the white balance on my Leica ME, so that's making for easier post-processing. So the Leica ME was my favorite digital camera until this 262 came along. It just simply made everything better. So let's look again at some of the reasons I think the 262 is a great camera. I love the 2-meter optimized frame lines, makes for more accurate framing. I like that they're LED illuminated. They kind of make the old illuminated by the window in the front here. These seem kind of dingy now. I didn't have any problems going to low light or having being too bright at any point. It just nicely ramped down or up as needed. The new shutter sounds great. It's just super sweet. You just really want to shoot pictures with this camera. The high ISO is welcomed, being able to shoot at 3200. That's great. I'm finding that the shutter release itself on the top of the camera is much smoother than what I was getting on my ME series. It doesn't have notchy feeling at all to it. The larger 1 gigabyte RAM buffer gives me some more headroom than the M9. I like being able to see the ISO and EV values on the camera on startup. The better ergonomics of the setting dial compared to the M9. The more accurate white balance is welcomed. I do like the faster setting of manual white balance and having this direct white balance button on the back. For me, the removal of video and live view is great. This is a traditional purist camera, shoots still pictures, does it really well. That's all I really need or want it to do. There's no unnecessary USB port here on this side, makes it even more weather resistant. Kind of cleans up the camera as well. Having the body weight practically the same as the M9 series, and the little dust sensor feature is kind of nice. So if you've ever wanted a digital Leica M body, there's never been a better time to buy. Leica is standing behind the sensor corrosion issues on the M9 series. So even if you're not the original owner, you can still send that M9 into Leica and they would replace the sensor. So you could pick up even a pretty good beater M9 and Leica will probably replace that sensor in that camera, and you'll probably get almost a brand new camera back. Right now, ME and M9 prices, you can probably find a really good one for about $3,000. So it's still a lot of money, but for what you're getting, it's still a really great bargain. Now, there are sensors out on the market that are capable of 6400 and beyond. So I'm not claiming this is some kind of a Sony low-light monster. And you can make an argument that this camera is maybe a generation or so behind Sony, Nikon, and Canon. But those aren't rangefinder cameras. And Leica is really the only game in town. So with the M262, we've reached a point where the image quality is, I'll say, quote, good enough. And the technology in the 262 doesn't hamstring the camera. I can see being happy with this 262 for many years to come. It's a Zen digital camera that's just simply fun to use and keeps out of your way. It strips things away I don't need or want from the M240, makes the camera more simple and leaner by improving the buffer, shutter, tactile feel, LCD, and high ISO that are coming from the M9 series. Thanks for watching.